Hello and welcome here to Silklife. We hope you're well. We're going to plunge straight on in this morning as we start to ask ourselves the question, where is Jesus? Before I get to those nuts and bolts, let me just say, in the 1950s, they believed that running a mile in under 4 minutes was completely impossible. Some described it as sport's greatest goal. Something as elusive and seemingly unattainable as climbing Everest. As we know, climbing Everest has been achieved, and so was running a mile in under 4 minutes. Because on the morning of 6th of May 1954, Sir Roger Bannister did the impossible. He'd been told by doctors that not only was running the 4-minute mile impossible for an athlete to do, but that actually attempting to do so was dangerous for his health. There are some brilliant videos on YouTube that I suggest you look up of Roger Bannister running that home stretch. He said afterwards, doctors and scientists said that breaking the 4-minute mile was impossible, that one would die in the attempt. Thus, when I got up from the track after collapsing on the finish line, I figured I was dead. Truth is, humanity's never stopped breaking the boundaries of sporting achievement, and then in October last year, Eliud Kipchoge became the first athlete to run a whole marathon in under 2 hours. So that's 26.2 miles, 42 kilometres, in 1 hour, 59 minutes and 40 seconds. Again, completely bonkers. And Kipchoge actually compared it to being the first man on the moon. He said he'd made history, just like Sir Roger Bannister. And as I was reading this material, it occurred to me that there's this Chinese proverb that says the person who says it cannot be done should not interrupt the person who is doing it. The person who says it cannot be done should not interrupt the person who is doing it. A while back, in our house, we were cooking a quick omelette, and just to brown the top off, Joe placed it under the grill in a frying pan, and a few moments later, once the omelette had beautifully browned off, she took the frying pan by the metal handle and completely scorched the skin on her hand from the palm right up to the fingertips of all 5 fingers, and very quickly there appeared a glaring redness, and we knew that was going to be uncomfortable. It was going to be painful. And as we were going to bed that night, I was a touch grumpy, but Joe turned to me and said, would you pray for my hand? And I was thinking, well, really, I'm in sleep mode. I don't really want to do this. I don't really full of any kind of encouragement or excitement that God's going to do this. But I said a very quick prayer nonetheless, because it would have been churlish not to. And just said, God, would you heal Joe's hand, help her to sleep through the night so that this isn't too uncomfortable. And do you know what? It was the humour of God that the next morning when we woke up, Joe's hand was completely fine. I mean, not just a little bit better, but completely fine. There was no evidence of any burning whatsoever. The skin was completely fine. She'd slept through the night, no blistering, no damage, no need for medical attention. All of these stories remind and challenge me that we're not talking about a God who is restricted by my expectations, my understanding, or my beliefs. He doesn't need me to agree or even keep up in order for him to be who he is. And this is super important as we ask our question of the morning, where is Jesus now? Because the Bible's got some lengthy descriptions of the days leading up to Jesus dying on the cross. And there are plenty of accounts of Jesus interacting with his disciples after his resurrection. And we then have this very simple paragraph at the end of the gospel accounts that describes an event that would have been truly life-changing for the guys that were there, but also has huge implications, huge ramifications for the whole of humanity. It's another one of Christianity's massive claims. Let me just read this passage to you. It's here in the end of Luke, and it says, Jesus led them out of Jerusalem as far as Bethany, so just a short walk. And lifting up his hands, he blessed them. And while he blessed them, he parted from them and was carried up into heaven. And they worshipped him and returned to Jerusalem with great joy and were continually in the temple blessing God. It's really interesting how when Jesus left them when he died on the cross, they were filled with sorrow. And yet at this point, they've seen something wonderful that means Jesus seemingly departing fills them with joy rather than sorrow. But just reflect on that passage. He parted from them. Just like that. A short walk outside Jerusalem, a prayer of blessing, and then gone. Carried up into heaven. Later on, Luke describes it as though a cloud took him out of their sight. The Bible has the most remarkable knack of saying the most earth-shattering things in the most matter-of-fact way, almost to the point of being comical. Just went in a cloud. What's your problem? Just disappeared. I mean, there's so many questions to that, aren't there? Where did he go? How did he go? Why did he go? What happens next? Truth is, I'm not sure I've got time this morning to do all of them justice. But allow me to fill in some of the spaces. I mean, for clarity, I don't mean I'm going to make up a story that fits. I'm going to pull in some references from other places in the Bible that help us to understand what happened in this moment that we've just read about. Is that okay? You with me? When you're on the other end of the internet, you haven't got much choice. To reverse back up for a moment, the Gospels describe Jesus appearing to his disciples over a period of 40 days following his resurrection. He's interacting with them on all manner of levels, in different places, and engaging in various activities like eating breakfast after a night shift. And then Jesus' disappearance at this point marks the end of these periods of visitation. It's a final departure in that sense. So why did he leave the earth? Why ascend? Well, there's a couple of points for me to make, but the first one is this. He ascended to reclaim what was rightfully his. Some of you will know the really famous passage in Philippians 2, and it runs like this. Jesus was by nature God. He didn't consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage, but rather he made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant and being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself. He became obedient to death, even death on a cross. So therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every other name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of the Father. You see, Jesus left his rightful place in heaven, his rightful status, and he became a man to complete the most remarkable rescue mission conceivable. And having completed that rescue mission, he's ascended, taken up, to be recognised once more, exalted to the highest place. The King that every knee should bow to, the name that every tongue should consider and acknowledge as Lord. Jesus has returned to a place of privilege and power. I love the Hebrews passage that says the sun is the dazzling radiance of God's splendour, the exact reputation of God's true nature, his mirror image. He holds the universe together and expands it by the mighty power of his spoken word. He accomplished for us the complete cleansing of sin, and then took his seat on the highest throne at the right hand of the majestic one. And he is now waiting for the right time to return to earth in glory. And that's the topic of another talk in weeks to come. But at that point, the Bible describes some incredible things. The dead rising, receiving resurrection bodies. And it's all quite mysterious and yet truly compelling. For any of us living with sickness or bereavement right now, this really matters. There is something. There is a hope beyond the grave. Because Jesus rose, so will we. Because Jesus has a resurrection body, so will we. Because Jesus ascended, so will we. Why? Because the Bible says that Jesus shares his inheritance with us. What belongs to Jesus can belong to us as children of God, co-heirs with Jesus. He is the Father's heir, and his inheritance can belong to us as children of God. He was God's child. We're now his children. He rises, we rise. He's clothed in a living body after death. We will be clothed in a living body after death. These are beautiful promises. We don't understand all the details, and at times it seems too good to be true, too weird and wonderful to be true. But this is where I land. Jesus made these promises. He's either mad as a box of frogs, or he's lying through his teeth, or he's telling the truth. And as I read about Jesus in the Bible, I see him to be the most remarkable guy. Unquestionable wisdom, compassion, and integrity. There is no sign of madness. There is too much compassion to be a compulsive liar. He's never given me a reason to doubt him because his track record is impeccable. So even when I don't fully understand his words, I can cling to his promises as a source of hope and encouragement because he's the one that made the promises. And he's given me no reason to doubt him. So we come to one of those promises that is beautiful and rich and lasting. As Jesus told his disciples, my Father's house has many rooms, and I am going there to prepare a place for you. This is Jesus' words. My Father's house has many rooms. I'm going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me so that you can be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going. How do they know? Because he is the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus' journey is a pattern for our future if we belong to him. Those who die in faith join him in the Father's house. Jesus described heaven as a glorious home owned by God. And Jesus has prepared a room for each of us to live in as part of God's family, the church. Jesus completed his task, so our hope is secure because he was the one that made it secure. It's not based on my effort. You see, in the past, the priests would stand in the temple day after day after day, making sacrifices to God in the hope that somehow it would divert any anger or punishment for human sin. And again, they would repeat the same offerings day after day, staving off the inevitable. And there was a futility to the cycle. But Jesus is our priest, and he makes one sacrifice, and it is a belter. He lays down himself. He becomes obedient to death himself. He does it once, but for everyone. And all can be covered by his sacrifice. I said earlier that Jesus is sat down next to God. Why sat down? Because that's what you do when you've finished a strenuous task. I painted my fence recently, or one side of them. And what did I do when I finished? I sat down. I didn't carry on painting. There was no need. The task was done. Jesus is sat down. We heard over Easter, Jesus shouted from the cross the tragic yet famous words, "It is finished." Why? Because the task was done. Because by one sacrifice, Jesus has made perfect forever those who are being made holy. And so there is a room reserved for us in the house of the Father. And the reservation is secure because in the reservation book in the hotel, when you open it up, it says a little note next to the room booking, room paid for in full by the hotel management. Room paid for in full by the hotel management. The price is paid for in full by God himself. This is good news. But allow me just one more question. What happens now? Okay, if I take it all on, what you've said, Dave, Jesus is in heaven, all right? And when I die, I can go there. Well, maybe. And maybe he'll come get me. But what about now? Is it the case that I just have to slug it through, making the best deal of it that I can? Am I on my own in this? Because sometimes it gets really tough and horrible things happen. And sometimes people let me down and they accuse me, and sometimes my own head and my own heart lets me down and I make some rubbish choices and I feel shocking. Sometimes money's tight and I get lonely, sick and tired and stressed and anxious, and the problems, they can really stack up. Can I count on God? Paul asked the same questions when he's writing to the early church in Rome, and to be honest, he answers it way better than I could. So let me read what he wrote. He said this to them: "If God is for us, who can ever be against us? Since God did not spare even his own son, but gave him up for us, won't he also give us everything else? Who dares accuse us whom God has chosen for good? No one. For God himself has given us right standing with him. Who then can condemn us? No one. For Jesus died for us, and he was raised to life for us, and he's sitting in the place of honour at God's right hand, pleading for us. Can anything separate us from the love of God? Does it mean he no longer loves us if we have trouble or calamity, or we're persecuted or hungry or destitute or in danger or threatened with death? No. Despite all these things, overwhelming victory is ours through Christ who loved us. And I'm convinced that nothing can separate us from God's love. Neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor demons, neither our fears for day or our worries about tomorrow, not even the powers of hell can separate us from God's love. No power in the sky above or in the earth below. Indeed, nothing in all of creation will ever be able to separate us from the love of God that's revealed in Jesus. Jesus is close. He's fully present. He intercedes for you. He stands in the gap, securing your future. And right now he holds you in the grip of his grace. He holds you as a cherished child of God. He holds you never letting go, never flinching, never distracted or glancing away, never ceasing, never stopping. He holds you with the express intention that he's given everything for you and will now securely carry you to your everlasting home. Your eternal destination is secure because his grip on you today is secure. And tomorrow, and all the days after that, he has you secure in him. In the last days of Jesus' time on earth, he left his disciples with a huge promise and a huge task, both massive in their significance. So big, in fact, we don't actually have time to talk about them now, but we're going to pick up on there next week. So tune in for the rest of the narrative. But for now, allow me to pray for you. Father, help us to experience and understand you. Give us a deepening intimacy with you. Help us see your glory. Help us understand all of this complex and sometimes confusing and sometimes bewildering and sometimes completely off our grid reference narrative of the life, death, the resurrection and ascension of Jesus, Lord. Help us not to just trim out the bits that don't feel possible, but to embrace the fact that you are beyond our understanding and our framework. God, would you illuminate our imagination, flood us with your light, help us experience the full revelation of your calling on our lives. Help us continually experience the immeasurable greatness of your power. Cause our faith to thrive. Make our lives an advert for your incredible promises, love and power. Hold us in the grip of your grace. Lord, I just pray in this moment, people that are tuning in and are a regular part of this church, or people that are tuning in and have never set foot inside a church. Lord, I just pray in this moment they would be aware of you holding them. They would be aware of your grip, of your Father embrace. Lord, I pray you bring them to that place of confidence and security that they're children of God, loved and cherished by you. Lord, fill them with an excitement of that future hope that one day there's a room for us in the Father's house, and that right now it is reserved and secured because you have paid the price for that room in full. Thank you so much, Lord. Amen. So we'll be here again next week. We'd love you to join us. But for now, have a great rest of the weekend. Let's hope the sunshine continues to shine.